My father forgot to hang up after his call from Paris. I stood there, frozen, as I heard him chuckle to my mother. "That deadbeat," he sneered. "She's unbelievably stupid." My mother chimed in. "Just act a little pathetic, and she'll sign the house over. She's pitifully desperate for our approval." They had no idea that their little deadbeat had just found the perfect reason to sell their future. My name is Olivia Reed, and at 29 years old, I was an expert at playing a role. That night, the role was the happy daughter, the gracious hostess. The thick, sticky heat of a late New England summer did nothing to ease the tension in my own backyard. It was Labor Day, and the annual barbecue was underway, not as a celebration, but as another performance. The air heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass and grilling meat felt suffocating. My father, Michael, stood guard over the grill, flipping burgers with a permanent scowl etched onto his face. He complained about the price of gas, his voice a low grumble, loud enough for the neighbors to overhear, a familiar soundtrack to our family gatherings. My mother, Brenda, drifted between the guests like a phantom hostess, her hands gesturing expansively. "Our garden has never looked better," she'd announce, pointing to the rose bushes I had spent weeks tending. "And the living room, we just had it repainted." She conveniently omitted the part where I was the we who had paid for the paint and spent an entire weekend with a roller in hand, my back aching. I forced a smile, my lips feeling stiff and foreign, as I moved through the crowd, refilling pitchers of lemonade. I felt like an invisible servant in the very house my grandmother had left to me, and me alone. Every compliment from a guest about the home's charm or the tasteful decor was intercepted by my parents, accepted with a proud nod, as if the praise was rightfully theirs. They were masters of appropriation, turning my efforts into their achievements with a casualness that was both breathtaking and utterly exhausting. I just kept smiling and pouring, a ghost in my own life. The last of the guests finally trickled out as dusk began to settle, leaving behind a battlefield of paper plates and empty beer cans. The performance was over. My father collapsed into a wicker patio chair that groaned under his weight. He let out a heavy sigh and cast a long, meaningful look toward his beat-up Ford Ranger parked in the driveway, its paint faded and a trail of rust creeping up from the wheel wells. "Olivia," he began, his voice laced with a carefully crafted weariness. "This truck of mine, it's giving me trouble again. A man my age shouldn't have to worry about breaking down on the side of the highway." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "Dave at the plant, his son just bought him a brand new F-150. A real beauty." My mother, seizing the opening with practiced precision, moved to stand behind me, placing a hand on my shoulder. The weight of it felt less like a comfort and more like a claim. "He's right, honey. You're sitting on a gold mine here," she said, her voice smooth and persuasive. "Just a small home equity loan. It's the least you could do to repay the man who broke his back his whole life to raise you, isn't it?" They said it so matter-of-factly, with such an air of absolute entitlement, it was as if they were asking me to pass the salt at the dinner table, not to leverage my entire inheritance for a vehicle. It was a transaction, pure and simple. My heart constricted. Repay? The word felt like a shard of glass in my throat. I took a deep, steadying breath, fighting to keep my voice even, to not let the tremor of disbelief shake it. "Dad, Mom, I'm sorry, but I can't do that." I looked from his expectant face to her encouraging one. "This house was Grandma's legacy to me. I'm not going to use it as collateral for anything." The change was instantaneous. My father's face darkened, the weary worker mask evaporating to reveal something hard and ugly underneath. He slammed his hand down on the patio table. The empty beer cans jumped and clattered against the glass top, the sound sharp and violent in the quiet evening. "Ungateful," he roared, his voice cracking with rage. "I knew it. You only ever think about yourself? Who do you think got you where you are today? My paltry paychecks, that's who. Your mother working at the checkout until her heels were worn to the nub. You sit here enjoying all this, while your own father drives a piece of junk. You selfish brat." He shoved his chair back, the wicker screaming in protest, and stormed into the house. The screen door slammed shut behind him with a sound like a gunshot. I was left standing in the wreckage of the evening, staring at my mother. She wasn't looking at me with disappointment. It was worse. It was a cold, calculated reproach. "You see, Olivia," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "you always know just how to hurt him." She turned and followed him inside, leaving me alone in the encroaching darkness. As night fell, I stood there, surrounded by the remnants of a party that was never for me. His words, ungateful, selfish, echoed in the silent yard, each one a fresh cut. My gaze drifted from the messy table to the living room window, and my eyes landed on the framed diploma hanging on the wall inside. My honors degree, and with a crushing weight, the memory of the night I received it came rushing back, tasting like ash. The memory, triggered by the diploma on the wall, was always the same. It played back in the dreary gray tones of a Boston May, the kind of day that promised spring but delivered only a lingering chill. My college graduation. I had worked 3 jobs for that day, juggling shifts at a diner, a campus library, and a retail store. I'd sacrificed countless nights out with friends, my social life shrinking to the size of a textbook. All for the moment I would walk across that stage. Dressed in an ill-fitting polyester graduation gown, I scanned the vast sea of faces in the auditorium, my heart a nervous drum against my ribs. I searched for them, my eyes aching from the effort. The 2 folding chairs I had saved early that morning, marked with a makeshift sign, remained stubbornly empty. The ceremony began, the speeches droned on, and a slow, cold dread began to seep into my bones, heavier than the humid air. When they finally called my name, Olivia Reed, summa cum laude, a wave of pride mixed with profound loneliness washed over me. I walked onto the stage, shook the dean's hand, and accepted the rolled-up parchment. My smile for the camera felt brittle, a fragile mask over a hollow core. I walked back to my seat, my chest tight. It was only as the ceremony was winding down, as the final procession of students began to file out, that they finally appeared. My parents materialized at the back of the auditorium, looking bored and out of place. My mother, Brenda, clutched a cheap bouquet of carnations, their edges already browning and wilted. My father, Michael, was in the middle of a jaw-cracking yawn, not even bothering to cover his mouth. There was no rush of excitement, no proud tears. "The traffic was just awful," my mother said when they reached me, her voice flat, offering the excuse without a hint of an apology. "Besides," she added, gesturing dismissively at the dispersing crowd, "it's all just a formality anyway." A formality. 4 years of my life, distilled into a formality. Instead of the nice restaurant I had dreamed of, the kind with white tablecloths and quiet celebration, my father drove us to a loud and sticky-floored TGI Fridays on the outskirts of the city. The only celebratory atmosphere came from a dozen TVs bolted to the walls, all blaring a Red Sox game. The air smelled of stale beer and fried appetizers. We were seated in a cramped booth, the vinyl cracked and peeling. My father ordered a tower of beer for himself and immediately launched into a litany of complaints about his work week, about his boss, about the ache in his back. He then turned his attention to me, his gaze falling on the diploma I had placed carefully on the table. He gestured to it with a flick of his wrist, as if it were a piece of trash. "So what are you going to do with that thing?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "You think that makes you special? The real world needs people who work with their hands, who do actual labor, not a bunch of kids who only know theory." My mother nodded in fervent agreement, as always. "Your father's right, Olivia. Now you're starting in the real world. I just hope all those years of college haven't made you forget the value of $1. They treated my achievement not as a milestone, but as a liability, a frivolous indulgence that had somehow made me less prepared for life. They ordered a bottle of the cheapest champagne on the menu to toast the occasion. My father fumbled with the cork, and when it finally came free, it didn't pop. It just hissed, a weak, pathetic sigh of escaping air that perfectly mirrored the deflation of my own spirit. The single bubble that rose in my glass and vanished was the ghost of my joy. I drank the sweet, cloying liquid and felt nothing but a rising tide of resentment. That night, I ended up alone on the cold concrete steps of my dorm building, clutching my diploma like a shield. The weight of the evening of their casual cruelty pressed down on me, and I couldn't bring myself to face my roommate's cheerful questions. The emptiness I'd felt on stage had metastasized into a deep, aching humiliation. I just sat there, letting the cool night air dry the silent tears on my cheeks. That's when the sleek black Lincoln Town Car pulled up to the curb. My grandmother, Eleanor, emerged from the driver's side, her presence as commanding as the vehicle she drove. She was a legend in the local real estate world, a woman who had built an empire from scratch with nothing but sheer grit and intelligence. She saw me, and her face, usually set in a determined, no-nonsense expression, softened instantly. She walked over and wrapped me in a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and strength. She didn't ask me why I was crying. She already knew. She simply held me. "I am so proud of you, Olivia," she said, her voice a firm, steady anchor in my swirling despair. "This diploma isn't just a piece of paper. It's evidence. It's the proof of your resilience." She took me away from there, driving us to a quiet, elegant Italian restaurant in the North End. A place of soft lighting and hushed conversations. She ordered us cannoli and espresso and listened, truly listened, as the whole story spilled out of me. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. Her eyes, sharp and clear, met mine. "They don't see your value, Olivia," she said, her words carving themselves into my memory. "That does not mean it doesn't exist. Your worth is not determined by their inability to recognize it. Never ever forget that." Her words were more than a comfort. They were a lifeline, pulling me from the depths of my own self-doubt. They were a promise that I was not what they said I was. That night, her belief in me became a small, protected flame inside my heart. It was a flame I would have to shield fiercely in the years to come. The air in my grandmother's lawyer's office was thick with the scent of old paper and mahogany, a smell I associated with Eleanor's unwavering strength. But now she was gone, and the grief was a fresh, raw wound. I sat on a stiff leather chair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. My parents, Michael and Brenda, sat beside me, their faces carefully arranged into masks of solemn sorrow, but their eyes betrayed them. Beneath the performance of grief, there was a glint of undisguised anticipation. They were vultures waiting for the feast to be announced. The lawyer, a sharp, composed woman named Laura Collins, adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. The rustle of the document was the only sound in the room as she read through the legal jargon. My parents leaned forward, almost imperceptibly. When Laura reached the most critical section, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. All real property located at 12 Cypress Hill, along with all associated assets, she read, her voice steady and clear. I bequeath to my sole granddaughter, Olivia Reed, unconditionally. A dead silence descended upon the room, so profound I could hear the frantic beat of my own heart. It was broken by a sharp, strangled intake of breath from my mother. I glanced over. My father was frozen, his face a mask of disbelief, turning to stone. Laura continued, stating that they were to receive $20,000, a paltry, almost insulting sum compared to the immense value of the estate. The air crackled with their silent fury. The drive home was suffocating. Not a single word was spoken, but the car was filled with their resentment. It was a tangible thing, pressing in on me from all sides. I braced myself for the explosion, for the accusations of manipulation, for the rage, but it never came. Instead, something far more insidious happened. The next day, the switch was flipped. My phone rang, and it was my mother, her voice dripping with a sweetness I hadn't heard in years. "Olivia, sweetie," she cooed. "I was thinking we should all go over to the family's house this weekend. You know, to clean up a bit. We need to make it feel warm and welcoming again." The family's house. The words were chosen with surgical precision. Then came my father, the man who had never uttered a single word of praise. To my face was now boasting to the neighbors over the fence. "That's my girl, Olivia," I heard him say one afternoon. "Smart, capable, got a good head on her shoulders, just like her grandmother." The praise felt like a foreign currency, counterfeit and worthless. They began moving their things into the house, not with permission, but with an assumption of right. They claimed the master bedroom, the largest in the house, pushing my belongings into a smaller guest room. They rearranged the furniture to their liking, treating me not as the rightful owner, but as a lucky child who had been granted a favor, a guest in my own home. Their invasion grew more brazen by the day. One afternoon, I came home to find my cherished collection of vintage vinyl records gone from the living room shelves. "Oh, that old junk," my mother said breezily when I asked. "They were just cluttering up the place, honey." The next week, I heard the buzz of a chainsaw. I ran outside to see that my favorite maple tree, the one that had stood in the yard for decades, was being cut down. My father stood supervising, arms crossed. It was blocking the view, he stated, as if that was the only justification needed. When I finally protested, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief, they presented a united front. "There are no boundaries in a family, Olivia," they said in unison. "Don't be so petty and count every little thing." I felt like I was drowning, the walls of my own home closing in. I made an appointment with Laura Collins. She listened patiently as the story tumbled out of me, her expression a mixture of sympathy and steely resolve. When I finished, she looked at me with her sharp, intelligent eyes. "Olivia, the will is ironclad. This house is 100% yours. They have no legal claim, none whatsoever." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a serious, deliberate tone. "Be careful, greed can turn people into monsters." Her words hung in the air, long after I left her office. They were not just a warning, they were a prophecy. I knew then that their invasion of my space was only the beginning. The monster of their greed was just waking up, and it would soon demand to be fed. That summer, the monster of their greed, as Laura Collins had predicted, began to stir. It started subtly. My parents began talking about their trip of a lifetime, a 3-month tour of Europe. The idea was floated casually at first, woven into dinner conversations. Glossy travel catalogs appeared on the kitchen table, left open to pages showcasing the canals of Venice and the Eiffel Tower in Paris. They would sigh wistfully, speaking of ancient castles and quaint villages, as if they were distant, unattainable dreams. I thought nothing of it, assuming it was just idle fantasy. The kind of thing people talk about when they browse the internet late at night. I was wrong. The campaign began one evening as I was washing dishes. My mother came and stood beside me, her expression carefully arranged into one of gentle melancholy. Her eyes were watery. "Olivia," she began, her voice soft and trembling just so, "your father has worked so hard his entire life. We're not getting any younger, you know. If we don't go now—" She let the sentence trail off, a masterpiece of emotional blackmail. My father, on cue, added his part from the living room couch, his voice a casual, matter-of-fact tone that made the suggestion seem all the more obscene. "We've already looked into it. A small loan against the house would cover everything. Think of it as just borrowing from your future, honey. We'll figure out the details later." After the incident with the truck, the audacity of this new request was a physical blow. It was a calculated insult, a clear signal that they saw my inheritance not as my future, but as their personal slush fund. My refusal was firm and immediate, and that's when hell began. My life in the house transformed into a relentless psychological war. Every meal became a torture session. My father would let out heavy theatrical sighs, pushing his food around his plate. "Well, I guess this is just our lot in life," he'd mutter, staring into the distance. "Work yourself to the bone your whole life, and for what? To die without ever having seen the world." My mother's tactics were different, but no less effective. She would start to cry quietly at the table, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. "All my friends, their children take them on cruises, on vacations," she'd sob. "I see their pictures on Facebook. They look so happy. I guess I just failed as a mother. I didn't raise a thoughtful child." The assault wasn't confined to the house. They began a smear campaign, calling relatives and old family friends, weaving a narrative of a cruel, selfish daughter who was hoarding her wealth while her poor aging parents suffered. The pressure mounted from all sides. Aunts would call me, their voices laced with disappointment. "Olivia, how could you be so cold to them?" The guilt was a constant, suffocating blanket they draped over me, and I felt myself drowning in it. My rational mind knew I was not in the wrong, that their demands were outrageous, but the emotional part of me, the part that had been conditioned for 29 years to seek their approval, was being worn down to a nub. I was exhausted. I was at my breaking point. And in a moment of profound weakness, seeking nothing more than a ceasefire, a moment of peace, I made a fatal mistake. I surrendered. "I won't mortgage the house," I told them, my voice barely a whisper. "But I'll help with part of the cost." My part quickly became the whole. The floodgates opened. They presented me with invoices and booking confirmations, each one accompanied by a new, heart-wrenching justification. First, it was the non-refundable first-class plane tickets. "It's a long flight, sweetie, and your father's back isn't what it used to be." Then came the string of expensive hotels. This one is a little pricey, but it's in a very safe neighborhood. It's important for seniors to be safe. Then the guided tours. This one has an English-speaking guide, honey. You know we don't speak any other languages. Each time I wrote a check, a piece of me withered. I transferred money from my personal savings account, the one I had painstakingly built since my first job, and watched my own dreams and my own security get siphoned away. The final tally was just under $30,000. It was nearly everything I had. The day they left for the airport was a surreal performance of gratitude. They hugged me tightly, their faces beaming. "Good girl, Olivia," my mother whispered in my ear, her voice thick with triumph, disguised as affection. "We knew you loved us." I stood at the curb, watching them wheel their brand new luggage toward the terminal entrance. They didn't look back. As their figures disappeared into the sliding glass doors, a wave of nausea washed over me. It was a toxic cocktail of emotions, the hollowness of my emptied bank account, and the sickening, bitter taste of self-loathing. I had bought their love, and I had never felt more worthless. For 3 weeks, the house was quiet. It was a strange, hollow peace, but it was peace nonetheless. I was starting to sleep through the night, to feel the tight knot in my shoulders begin to loosen. I was rediscovering the rhythm of my own life. The quiet was broken by the most mundane of things. A slow, steady drip, drip, drip from the kitchen faucet. An annoyance, nothing more. I remembered my father had kept the warranty papers for the new fixtures, so I decided to call him. I knew the international roaming charges would be steep, but the sound was a tiny, constant reminder of his presence, and I wanted it gone. I dialed. The call connected across an ocean, and I was met with the faint and tinny sound of a Parisian café, the clatter of porcelain, the murmur of French. My father answered, his voice sharp with impatience. I explained the problem quickly. He told me, with audible irritation, to check the bottom right drawer of his desk. "That's it, this is costing a fortune," he grumbled, and I heard him say goodbye. "Okay, bye, Dad," I replied. And then I waited for the click of the call ending, but it never came. He didn't hang up. He must have slipped the phone into his coat pocket, forgetting the line was still active. I was about to disconnect when I heard her voice, clear as a bell, cutting through the cafe noise. My mother. "Was that her again, calling to bother you?" Brenda's voice was laced with a familiar, weary irritation, the tone she used when talking about a chore she despised. And then I heard a sound that made the blood freeze in my veins. My father's chuckle. It wasn't a laugh of amusement, it was a short, sharp, ugly bark of contempt. "Yeah, the little deadbeat," he sneered. "Always something. You have to admit, though, she's unbelievably stupid." I stood frozen in my kitchen, the phone clamped to my ear. The world seemed to tilt and shrink until it was only the tiny speaker. My own heartbeat thundered, a frantic drum against the sudden, terrifying silence in my mind. My mother's laugh joined his, a high-pitched conspiratorial sound. "Just act a little pathetic and she opens her wallet right up. It's pitiful how desperate she is for our approval." Then my father's voice turned serious, the mocking tone replaced by cold, hard calculation. "When we get back, we need to play this harder. Find a way to get her to sign over the deed to the house. Her weakness is that she still wants us to love her. We just have to keep pressing that button." My world didn't just crack, it shattered. It imploded into a million tiny, sharp-edged pieces. The carefully constructed reality I had been living in, the one where I believed that deep down, somewhere they loved me, was annihilated in an instant. Every sacrifice, every check I'd written, every moment I'd swallowed my pride to keep the peace, it was all a lie, a transaction in which I was the fool. My hand was shaking, but with a surge of ice-cold adrenaline, I lurched toward my home office desk. My movements were clumsy, robotic. I fumbled for the old landline phone, punched the button for the speaker, and hit the record function on the connected answering machine. I had to. I needed proof of this insanity. I listened for another few minutes as they talked about a croissant, completely oblivious. And then, finally, the line went dead. The silence that rushed back in was deafening, heavier than before. I slowly lowered the phone. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at nothing. Then the tears came. But they weren't the hot, salty tears of grief or humiliation. These were different. They were cold, born from a furnace of rage that had just ignited in my gut. Every last lingering illusion I had about my family, every desperate hope for their love, died in that moment. It was an execution. It's a strange, powerful moment when that happens, isn't it? The moment the pain doesn't just hurt anymore, it becomes fuel. The instant you realize that the tears you're crying are not for what you've lost, but for what you're about to do. Deadbeat, stupid, desperate for our approval. They were no longer insults, they were my new coordinates, the blueprint for my liberation. In the cold, quiet aftermath of their betrayal, a decision formed, not in my head, but in my very bones. It was hard and sharp and unshakable. The debt had just been called in, and it was time for the little deadbeat to collect. The rage didn't burn out, it crystallized. By morning, the grief and shock had been replaced by a cold, diamond-hard clarity. There was no more room for tears. There was only room for a plan. The first thing I did was call my boss, my voice a model of calm composure. "I'm not feeling well," I said. "I need to take the next 3 days off." He agreed without question. I hung up, my first move made on a chessboard only I could see. My second call was to Laura Collins, so I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told her what happened, my voice a monotone narration of the facts, each word delivered like a piece of evidence. Then I held the phone to the speaker of the answering machine and played the recording. The silence on her end was profound, stretching for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was stripped of all lawyerly detachment. It was pure, steely resolve. "Olivia, you have every right. This recording is clear evidence of intent to commit fraud. They have no legal leg to stand on. We act now." I felt the first real flicker of power, a current of validation that strengthened my spine. I wasn't alone in this. My third call was to Chris Adams, a colleague from a previous job who was now a top real estate broker in the city. I knew I needed someone I could trust implicitly, someone fast and discreet who wouldn't get bogged down in the messy emotions of it all. We met at a nondescript coffee shop miles from my neighborhood, a place of transient faces and anonymity. I bought him a black coffee and laid it out plainly. "Chris, I need to sell a house," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I need it done fast, I need it done quietly, and I'm willing to sell below market value for the right cash offer. No for sale sign on the lawn. No public listings on Zillow. This needs to be off-market, a pocket listing." His eyes widened in surprise, but as I gave him the briefest, most sanitized version of the story, a toxic family situation, his expression shifted to one of grim understanding. He didn't pry or offer platitudes. He just nodded slowly, a true professional. "Consider it done, Liv. I'll handle it." With my allies in place, I returned to the house. The anger had given me an astonishing level of focus, a kind of hyper-aware lucidity that felt like a superpower. I sat at my laptop and created a new Excel spreadsheet. The file name was simply Exodus. I built it with methodical precision, creating 5 tabs: to-do list, assets, new contacts, budget, and timeline. The plan took shape with every keystroke, a fortress of logic against the chaos of their betrayal. First, a new sanctuary. I went online and found a temporary furnished apartment for rent in Worcester, a solid hour's drive from Boston. It was a different world, a place where no one knew my name. Close enough to manage things, far enough to be invisible. I paid 3 months' rent up front with my credit card, a definitive, non-refundable step. Second, a clean slate. I drove to a different bank, a credit union I had never used before, and opened a new checking and savings account under my name alone. I walked to my old bank and withdrew every penny, transferring it to the new untainted account. I then signed up for a new phone number online, a prepaid plan with a fresh start. Third, securing my history. I went back to the new bank and rented a safe deposit box. One by one, I placed my life's most important documents inside its cold metal confines. My passport, my birth certificate, my college diploma, and most importantly, my grandmother's original will and the deed to the house. Each action was a brick being laid, a wall being built between my future and their greed. I was sealing myself off from them, piece by piece. The final and most difficult task was to surgically remove my life from the house. I bought 2 packs of colored sticky notes, blue for what was mine, pink for what was theirs. I walked through each room, a silent arbiter of my own past, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. Blue sticker on my favorite reading armchair. Pink sticker on the gaudy porcelain lamp my mother loved. Blue on my collection of classic novels. Pink on the worn leather recliner my father always fell asleep in. The TV remote clutched in his hand. Every pink sticker felt like a small act of defiance, a reclaiming of space. Their things were no longer part of a home. They were just objects, artifacts of a life that was now over. I saved their bedroom for last. It smelled of my mother's cloying perfume and my father's stale cigars. As I sorted through the clutter on a nightstand, my fingers brushed against a small silver picture frame. I picked it up. It was an old photo from a family trip to Cape Cod. A much younger version of me, maybe 5 or 6 years old, was perched on my father's shoulders. My smile in the picture was wide and guileless, full of a pure, uncomplicated joy I could barely remember feeling. A sharp, unexpected pang of grief shot through me, an ambush of sorrow. For a fleeting second, I saw the little girl who just wanted her father's love. The ache was real, a ghost limb of a long-dead hope. But then, his words from the phone call echoed in my mind, cold and clear. The little deadbeat. The memory was an antidote to the sorrow, a splash of ice water on the ember of sentimentality. The little girl in the photo was gone. She had been betrayed by the very man who was holding her up. With a steady hand, I placed the picture frame face down in a cardboard box I had labeled in thick black marker. Property of Michael and Brenda. The past was packed, the future was waiting, and I had a war to win. In the process of dismantling the past, I found a message from it. While clearing out the final drawers of my grandmother's old writing desk, my fingers brushed against a small cedar-lined box. It had the faint, sharp scent of her study, of old books and ambition. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among a few antique fountain pens with gold nibs, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name was written on it in her familiar, decisive script, "For my Olivia." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, hopeful rhythm. With trembling fingers, I carefully broke the seal. The paper was heavy and expensive, and her handwriting was as strong and confident on the page as she had been in life. "My dearest Olivia," it began, "if you are reading this, I suspect you find yourself at a significant crossroads, a moment where the path you are on has become untenable. I want you to know this. I am leaving you this house, not to be a gilded cage that traps you, but to be a launching pad that frees you. For years, I have watched the way your parents look at you, not with the unconditional love of a parent, but with the cold calculation of an investor sizing up an asset. They see your kindness, your deep well of empathy, as a weakness to be exploited. Do not ever let them convince you of that. It is your greatest strength. This house is yours. Your independence is yours. Use it, sell it, do whatever you must to build the life you deserve, a life of your own making, even if it means leaving the past and its ghosts behind. Your worth was never up for their debate. It is absolute." Tears welled in my eyes and fell onto the page, blurring the ink. But for the first time in weeks, they were not tears of anger or pain. They were tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude. It was as if she had reached across the chasm of time to take my hand, to whisper in my ear that I was sane, that my feelings were valid, that the path I was choosing was the right one. She had seen it all, and she had kept the receipts. Beneath my letter was another thicker bundle of papers, tied with a simple blue ribbon. They were letters from my parents to her dating back years, a secret history of their entitlement. I sat on the floor of the empty room and read them one by one, the afternoon light fading outside. A cold, nauseating feeling grew in the pit of my stomach. It was a relentless chronicle of financial incompetence and emotional manipulation, a paper trail of their true character. They were constantly asking for money, money to fix the car, money to pay off credit card debt, money for a series of can't-miss investment opportunities that had, of course, all failed spectacularly. Each letter was a symphony of whining, blame-shifting, and thinly veiled threats about their failing health or dire straits, all designed to pry open her wallet. Tucked behind the letters were photocopies of bank statements that my grandmother had meticulously saved. On each one, she had highlighted the transfers she'd made to their account, a silent accounting of their endless needs. She had known everything. She had seen their true faces long ago. This stack of papers was more than just proof of their irresponsibility. It was proof of her silent protection, a final gift of validation from beyond the grave. My resolve, already solid, hardened into something unbreakable. 2 weeks later, to the day, my new phone buzzed. It was Chris. His voice was all business, sharp and efficient. "I've got them, Olivia," he said, no preamble. A doctor and his wife, relocating from California. They just sold their practice, they're flush with cash. They love the neighborhood and want a fast, clean transaction. They're offering $915,000, all cash, no inspection contingency. It was a phenomenal offer, more than I had dared to hope for. It was a clean cut, a surgical removal. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the wild relief that was flooding my system. "Tell them yes." The closing took place the following week at Laura's downtown office. The atmosphere was professional, quiet, and blessedly sterile. I sat at a long, polished conference table across from the buyers, a pleasant-looking couple whose faces shone with the excitement of a new beginning for them and for me. I signed my name over and over again on the thick stack of documents Laura slid in front of me. With each stroke of the pen, I felt another invisible chain breaking, the ink severing a tie to my old life. There were no parents here to hover, no passive-aggressive comments, no suffocating sense of obligation, only the quiet, professional hum of a life-altering transaction. When the last paper was signed, the wire transfer was confirmed. Laura printed a copy of the confirmation, then slid a cashier's check across the table to me. I picked it up. The sheer weight of it, the crispness of the paper, felt unreal. I stared at the number printed in stark black ink, a number that represented more than just money. It represented freedom. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on the past and a new one creaking open to the future. An almost dizzying wave of relief washed over me, so potent it nearly took my breath away. The immense, crushing weight I had carried on my shoulders for so many years, the weight of their expectations, their disappointments, their endless needs, it all just vanished. I was untethered. I was light. I was free. The check was in the bank. The plan was in motion. There was no turning back. On Saturday morning, precisely 2 days after the closing, an unmarked moving truck pulled into the driveway of 12 Cypress Hill. There was no flashy company logo on its side, just plain, anonymous white paint. I had orchestrated everything with the cold precision of a general, commanding a silent strategic operation. Operation Exodus was executed with a swift, quiet efficiency that I directed myself, a clipboard in hand. The two-man crew was professional and asked no questions, their faces impassive as they followed my color-coded system. Everything with a blue sticky note, my books, my clothes, my favorite reading chair, the few pieces of furniture that were truly mine, was carefully wrapped in moving blankets and loaded onto the truck. This was my life, being carefully segregated and prepared for its journey to the new anonymous apartment in Worcester. Everything with a pink sticky note, which constituted the vast majority of the house's contents, was handled with the same professional care. My father's worn leather recliner, my mother's collection of porcelain dolls with their dead, glassy eyes, their oversized bedroom set, their entire transplanted existence, it was all professionally packed into sturdy cardboard boxes. But this cargo wasn't going to the dump or a donation center. It was being transported to a climate-controlled storage unit across town. A unit I had rented under the name Michael Reed. I had even prepaid the first 6 months. It was a move that was both practical and deeply, satisfyingly ironic. I wasn't a monster seeking destruction. I was just a meticulous executor of my own liberation. I was giving them exactly what they had given me, a transactional relationship. Before the movers cleared each room, I took photographs with my phone, documenting the process with the dispassionate eye of an insurance adjuster. I took a before shot with all the furniture in place and an after shot of the bare, empty space. I time-stamped them and emailed the entire album, dozens of photos, to Laura's secure server, creating an unassailable record of the day's events. There would be no room for their lies, no space for them to claim I had been reckless or destructive. When the last box was loaded and the truck rumbled away, I walked through the empty house one final time. The silence was different now. It wasn't hollow anymore. It was clean. The rooms felt larger, brighter, echoing with potential. There was no lingering scent of my mother's cloying perfume in the master bedroom. No echo of my father's angry sports commentary from the living room. The house had been exorcised of its ghosts. It was just a house again, a beautiful, empty vessel waiting for its new, hopeful owners. It was scrubbed clean of my past, a blank slate, and it felt wonderful. My last stop was the kitchen. I stood in the center of the vast, empty room, the place where so many tense meals had been eaten, so many ultimatums delivered. The afternoon sun streamed in, glinting off the polished granite countertops that had once been the stage for their drama. This was where the final message had to be left. I took a single, bright yellow sticky note from my pocket. With a thick black Sharpie, I wrote 4 simple words, words that they had given me, words that I was now returning to sender with chilling accuracy. The deadbeat did this. It wasn't an explanation, it wasn't an apology, it was a statement of fact, a final definitive answer to their betrayal. I owed them nothing more, certainly not a lengthy letter detailing my pain. This was more powerful. I placed the note squarely in the middle of the cold granite island. Beside it, I left 2 things, a single, shiny key to the storage unit and a crisp folded letter from Laura's law firm. The letter was brief and formal, notifying them that the contents of a unit rented in Michael Reed's name would be considered abandoned and auctioned off by the facility if not claimed within 30 days of the date, postmarked on the envelope I would later mail. That was it. My work there was done. I walked out the front door for the last time, not with sadness, but with a profound sense of purpose. I locked the door behind me, a door to which I no longer had a key. I dropped the new owner's keys into the mailbox for their realtor to collect later that day. I got into my car, turned the ignition, and pulled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, the image of the house on Cypress Hill, my grandmother's house, my former prison, grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a shape against the skyline. Then it was gone. I did not look back. I drove the hour to Worcester, the highway stretching out before me like a promise. I pulled into the parking lot of my new apartment building. It was smaller, more modest, an anonymous brick building that promised nothing but peace. But it was entirely, completely mine. That night, I slept in a new bed, in a new city, in a new life. And for the first time in more years than I could count, I slept deeply, dreamlessly, without a single knot of anxiety in my stomach. The final toxic cord had been severed. The war was over. All that was left was to wait for the losers to realize they had been defeated. The peace in my new apartment in Worcester lasted for 10 days. 10 days of quiet mornings, organized closets, and the simple, profound joy of existing without judgment. And then, exactly as predicted, the storm broke. My old phone, which I had kept charged in a drawer for this very purpose, began to vibrate itself into a frenzy. I let it go to voicemail every time. The messages were a predictable, pathetic symphony of escalating panic. The first few were laced with confusion. "Olivia, honey, it's Mom. We're home. The key isn't working. Call us back." Then came the anger. "Olivia, what the hell is this? Where is everything? Call me back now." This one was from my father, his voice a distorted roar of fury. Then came the messages that were a chaotic duet of his rage and her theatrical sobbing. Finally, the threats began. "You ungrateful brat, we're going to the police. We'll sue you for everything you have." I listened to each message with a strange sense of detachment, a scientist observing a chemical reaction. I calmly saved each audio file, numbered them, and emailed the entire collection to Laura Collins with the subject line, Phase 2. Then I turned the phone off. The next day, they showed up at my office. I had anticipated this. My boss, a decent man to whom I had explained that I was dealing with a volatile family matter and needed to preemptively apologize for any potential disruption, was prepared. He intercepted them at the reception desk. I watched on the security feed as he politely but firmly informed them that they were trespassing on private property and would be escorted out by security if they did not leave immediately. They left, but not before my father shouted my name across the lobby. That evening, I received one final voicemail on the old phone. It was my father, but the rage was gone, replaced by a low, menacing growl. A cornered animal's threat. Meet me, Panera Bread downtown, 3 p.m. tomorrow. You be there. If you don't show up, I swear to God I will come to your office every single day and make a scene until they fire you. This was it, the final confrontation. I took out my new phone, the one with the untraceable number, and sent a text to his phone. 2 words. I'll be there. The next day I chose my armor, a simple black blazer, dark jeans, and flat shoes. I felt calm, centered, and in control. I drove into Boston and deliberately arrived at the Panera Bread at 3:15 p.m. It was a small, calculated act, a way of signaling that this meeting was on my terms, my schedule. They were sitting in a booth in the back corner, trying to be inconspicuous, but radiating a toxic energy that was anything but. My father's face was a thundercloud of fury. My mother's was puffy and red from what I was sure was a combination of real and performative crying. I walked over and slid into the booth opposite them. I didn't say hello. I simply placed my new phone face up on the table between us, and with a deliberate, silent gesture, pressed the record button. The small red light glowed. I looked at them, not as my parents, but as 2 individuals who had done me harm. "Hello, Michael," I said, my voice even and cool. "Hello, Brenda." The use of their first names hit him like a physical slap. "Who do you think you're calling Michael?" he snarled, leaning across the table. Brenda immediately started in with the waterworks. "The house, Olivia. Where is our house?" she wailed, loud enough for the nearby tables to turn and look. "How could you do this to your own mother and father?" I met her tear-filled gaze without flinching. My own eyes were dry. "Which house would that be?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Do you mean the one you were planning to trick me into signing over to you?" A flash of genuine shock crossed their faces. "What? That's crazy. We would never do that," my father sputtered, his denial loud and unconvincing. "You're lying," Brenda sobbed. "Am I?" I asked. I picked up my phone. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment, and then I pressed play. His own voice, tinny and distorted, but undeniably his, filled the space between us. "Yeah, the little deadbeat. She's unbelievably stupid." Then her voice, high and conspiratorial. "It's pitiful how desperate she is for our approval." And then, the final blow. Find a way to get her to sign over the deed. Her weakness is that she still wants us to love her. I watched their faces as their own words condemned them. The color drained from my father's face, leaving it a pasty, mottled white. My mother's manufactured sobs choked in her throat, replaced by a strangled gasp. They were caught, utterly and completely. Michael was the first to recover, falling back on his default setting, blustering threats. This is illegal. You can't record people without their permission. I'll sue you." I gave a small, cold smile. "I've already spoken with my lawyer, Michael. In Massachusetts, it's perfectly legal to record a conversation you are a party to, which I was. You have no legal claim to the house or its proceeds. And I have this, I tapped the phone, as evidence of your intent to commit fraud. So please go ahead and sue. I'd love to see how that plays out for you in court. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. He had nothing. His power was gone. Brenda, seeing that threats had failed, tried her final weapon, the one that had worked for so many years. She reached across the table, her hand trembling, trying to touch mine. Olivia, baby, I'm so sorry. I pulled my hand back. I cut her off, my voice as sharp and final as a slammed door. No. I stood up, my chair scraping softly against the tile floor. I looked down at them, at these two diminished, pathetic people who had held so much power over me for so long. This is the last time we will ever speak, I said, each word a carefully laid stone in the new boundary wall around my life. Do not contact me. Do not come to my work. Do not try to find me. If you do, you will be hearing from my lawyer. Good luck with the storage unit. I turned and walked away without a second glance. I didn't run. I walked calmly through the crowded cafe, past the families and students, and out into the bright afternoon sun. I left them there, sitting in stunned silence in a cage of their own making, their poison finally, blessedly, neutralized. The silence that followed the confrontation at Panera Bread was absolute. They never contacted me again. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clean, quiet shore. 6 months after that day, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia. The humid southern air felt a world away from the biting winters of Boston. It was a deliberate choice, a move toward warmth, both literal and metaphorical. Using a portion of the money from the sale of the house, I bought a small, charming townhouse in the Virginia Highland neighborhood, a place with tree-lined streets and a quiet, creative energy. It had a small patch of a backyard, just big enough for a garden. The first thing I did was paint the living room walls a soft, calming shade of mint green, a color I'd always loved but had never been allowed to use. I filled the bookshelves with my own books, hung art on the walls that I had chosen, and planted a garden of my own. There were no critics, no judges, no one to undermine my choices. This space was a sanctuary, built not just with money, but with the freedom I had fought for. I found a new job at a boutique business consulting firm, a place where my analytical skills were not just used, but celebrated. My colleagues became my friends. They saw my competence and my kindness not as weaknesses to be exploited, but as assets. My new life was quiet, peaceful, and filled with purpose. But healing isn't just about changing your scenery, it's about tending to the internal landscape. I began weekly therapy sessions with a woman named Dr. Jennifer Lee, a specialist in family trauma. She was warm, intelligent, and gave me the language I so desperately needed. It was Dr. Lee who first used the terms financial abuse and emotional abuse to describe my experiences. Giving a name to the invisible wounds was a profound turning point. It was an official validation that I hadn't been overly sensitive or dramatic. I had been a victim of a systematic campaign of manipulation, and my actions had not been an overreaction. They had been an act of self-defense. The guilt I had carried for so long, the shame of thinking I was the problem, finally began to dissolve. Inspired by my own journey to financial and emotional literacy, I started something new. On the weekends, I began hosting free workshops for young people, particularly women, in a rented community center space. I called the workshop series Build Your Foundation. We talked about recognizing financial manipulation, setting healthy boundaries, and understanding that your value is inherent, not something to be earned through endless sacrifice. I turned my scars into a roadmap for others, my pain into a source of power for them. On the 1-year anniversary of my grandmother's death, I flew back to Boston. The city felt different now, no longer a place of painful memories, but simply a part of my history. I drove to the cemetery and found her grave, a simple, elegant stone of gray granite set beneath a sprawling oak tree. I had brought a large bouquet of white peonies, her favorite flower, their lush, full blooms, a symbol of prosperity and honor. I knelt on the soft grass and placed the flowers gently on the stone. The name Eleanor Vance was carved deep and clear. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, my voice quiet in the peaceful air. "Thank you for believing in me, and thank you for giving me the strength to finally believe in myself." In that quiet moment, I had a final, clarifying realization. The heaviest burden I had ever carried wasn't the financial responsibility or the emotional labor. It was the crushing, hopeless effort of trying to earn a love that should have been given freely. It was a race with no finish line, a debt that could never be repaid. Now I was free from that burden. I had my friends, my colleagues, my chosen family, who loved me for who I was, not for what I could provide. I had finally found my true home, not in the bricks and mortar of a house, but in the quiet, unshakable sanctuary of self-respect and peace I had built for myself from the ground up. My journey has finally found its peace, a foundation built not of brick and mortar, but of self-respect. I hope my story can serve as a reminder of your own strength, a boundary you successfully set, or one you are gathering the courage to build. If there is one thing I have learned, it is this: your worth is not a negotiation, it is a fact. I found so much comfort in knowing I wasn't alone. If you feel comfortable, please share one thing you learned from your own journey in the comments below. Your story could be the validation someone else desperately needs to hear today. Thank you for listening.